hope you're doing well. My name is Keerat, and I'm a full-time uni student who's actually off for the summer. And one thing about me is that I love to bake and cook in my free time. Like in the past, I've been the person that gives out those super cute cookie boxes during the holidays, and I'll be the one in the family that makes random but surprisingly good meals and desserts throughout the week. So taking my love for cooking and baking into account, I've been playing with the idea of using the summer to start something small, like an at-home bakery that offers pre-orders. But to start something like that, I do want to make sure that I love everything that I'm selling. So I will be batch testing brown butter chocolate chip cookies in this video, and I'm making these cookies for the first time, and I'll be figuring out if I like them and experimenting to see how I can get the perfect cookie. Okay, and it's time for us to get started, and I so hope that you enjoy this video. To start off, I brown the butter. Browning butter just involves melting butter over a medium heat and letting it simmer until the butter solids separate and look brown. Brown butter gives off this deliciously nutty aroma. Once the butter cooled, I added the brown sugar and the white sugar. I tend to add things by weight for better accuracy. I creamed the butter and the sugar together, and then I added the egg, a bit of milk, and vanilla before mixing it more. To be honest, it's a pretty standard chocolate chip cookie recipe once the butter is browned. At this point, the wet ingredients were all mixed. Moving on to the dry ingredients, I mixed together the flour, salt, and baking soda. And then I added it into the wet ingredients periodically. This was honestly one of my favorite parts of the process because it was weirdly satisfying to do. Then it was time for the mix-ins. For this recipe, I added in chopped chunks of dark chocolate and semi-sweet chocolate chips. I chopped up the chocolate myself, which was also very satisfying, and I didn't aim for any consistency in size because I love having different sized chocolate chunks in my cookies. Once the chocolate was all chopped, I added that in alongside the chocolate chips. And then I added in the rest of the flour and kneaded the dough by hand. I loved how the dough turned out. Adding both the chunks and the chips was such a good choice. I put the dough in the fridge and I let it chill for about 30 minutes to really let the flavors develop. After chilling, I took the dough out of the fridge and got ready for my first test batch. Before doing the testing though, I noticed that the dough wasn't holding the chocolate that well, so I decided to saran wrap the dough instead. In the first batch, my goal was to compare two different weights of dough, so I used my kitchen scale to measure them out, and then I rolled them up and into the oven they went. While the first batch baked, I prepped a sheet to record all my batch data, and for the first batch, I had two different columns, 50 grams and 56 grams. After 8 minutes, the cookies were done. I took them out of the oven and I put them on the cooling rack, and at first glance, I thought they looked pretty overdone. You can see how dark the cookies were at the bottom. And these cookies were also not as wide as I would have hoped. Finishing touch on these cookies was a sprinkle of sea salt. After letting these cookies cool for a bit, I broke open the 50-gram cookie, and I loved the height of the cookie, and the texture inside looked soft and promising. I loved the color on these cookies. I thought they were a really nice golden brown. When I took a bite, I instantly got hit with a lot of chocolate, and the chocolate overpowered the brown butter flavors of the cookie. And in terms of texture, I loved how soft the cookie was, but I wish that it would have been crispier on the edges. And for the 56-gram cookie, it was a bit heavier, and when I broke it open, I noticed that the height was still what I wanted. It was great, and I was happy with how the texture looked inside the cookies. I took a bite, and the ratio of chocolate to cookie was better. The chocolate wasn't quite as overpowering, but I still found that there was too much chocolate in general. After this tasting, I got ready for batch number 2. I wanted to keep both cookies at 56 grams, but bake them for less time so that the bottoms of the cookies wouldn't come out so dark. In this batch, my dough wasn't quite as cold as it had been in batch 1, so I was testing for the chill time variable in a way as well. These cookies only got 6 minutes in the oven, and when they came out, they did look underbaked. And again, they looked too small for my liking. I put the usual sea salt on top and I waited for them to cool down. Weirdly enough, the cookies were underbaked, but the bottoms turned out dark again. I broke open the cookies and the texture inside looked promising, but the cookies were softer in general because they had had less time in the oven. So again, they were missing that crisp edge that I would have liked. These cookies still tasted a bit too chocolatey, but I was happy with the base brown butter taste. With all this baking in the house, my family was itching for some cookies at this point, so in batch number 3, I made 4 cookies. This batch truly tested the effect of chilling dough because the dough was chilled for an hour. I kept the weight of the dough the same in all the cookies, and I went back to baking for 8 minutes in the oven. Out of the oven, these cookies looked a lot more visually appealing than the last 2 batches, like I loved the height and the color. I let them cool down for a bit and then I opened one up. The cookie was soft in the middle, but it had some crispiness on the edges, which had been exactly what I was trying to go for, and thankfully, the bottoms were not as dark as the batches before. I took a bite and the texture was good, but I was worried that the inside was a bit undercooked. Overall, I found the ratio and the texture to be the best in these cookies. Batch number 4 was my final cookie of the night, and in this batch, I decided to play with the oven temp a bit to make sure the cookies could actually cook through. So instead of baking it at 375, I baked this cookie at 360, and like before, the dough was chilled and I kept the weight the same. Out of the oven, this cookie looked so promising. I loved the height and the color of the cookie, and thankfully, the cookie didn't look underbaked or too soft. The outside actually looked perfectly crispy. The drawbacks, though, were that the bottom was still too dark and the cookie was still too small. After letting it cool, I broke the cookie open. This one was a lot more set than the others. It had a great texture inside and there didn't seem to be too much chocolate. This was my last cookie of that night and I was already feeling oversugared, so I let this one cool down fully before I tasted it. While tasting, I noticed that the chocolate didn't overpower the brown butter flavors, and the good height of the cookie allowed for the chocolate to be more spread out in each bite. So overall, I was happy with the flavor and this was a solid cookie. I would have ended the video here after this day of testing, but as I was editing, I found myself wanting to keep testing to really perfect the cookie. So I did another batch a few weeks after, and this batch was done after my winter semester exams. For this batch, I bumped up the weight per cookie to 65 grams and I baked it at 360 for 9 minutes. While I was prepping this batch, my kitchen scale was acting up again, so I accidentally put more white sugar and less brown sugar in this dough. Out of the oven, these cookies looked amazing. They had a good height, a soft center, and crispy edges. I was also very happy with the increase in dough because it made the cookie much bigger, but it still wasn't as big as I would have liked. I took a bite and the same problem arose again, where there was just too much chocolate. So to fix that, I used the same dough to bake another batch, but I lowered the amount of chocolate in the cookie dough. This cookie actually looked perfect when it came out of the oven. It looked to have perfectly crispy edges and it was perfectly golden brown. I waited a while before testing this cookie and I absolutely loved this cookie. The ratio of dough to chocolate was perfect and the caramel and nutty notes of the brown butter dough worked so well with the chocolate, though I did find the bitterness of the dark chocolate chunks to be a little bit off-putting, so I think I would change that in my final cookie. So to conclude this video, the cookie I ended up with was a 9 out of 10 in my opinion. The change in the ratio of brown sugar to white sugar actually worked so well. I loved the base notes of the brown butter dough. And by the end, we reached a perfect ratio of dough to chocolate. All it needs to be a 10 is to make it bigger and to experiment with using milk chocolate instead of dark chocolate. But overall, this was such an informative round of testing to do. I'm thrilled to have a cookie I could sell one day. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope to see you again for the next one. Bye!